Once upon a time, I was a mom and relishing in that role. Every day, I tried to be present with my boys and the best version of myself. One day, my son Jesse died. Because of that, I changed everything in my life and decided to choose love over fear. Because of that, I started the Choose Love movement. Until finally, I began seeing change. And ever since that day, I feel that I'm living my purpose and have peace beyond understanding.
Welcome to A Life Worth Working, a podcast about how we get to the soul of work. We're your hosts, Michelle Weiss and Dana Allen Walsh. I'm an education and workforce strategist, and Dana is a senior pastor of a progressive church.
And as always, we love hearing your comments, questions, and thoughts. So please know you can email us anytime at hello@alifeworthworking.com. And make sure you subscribe to our show and share it with your friends and loved ones who may be searching for more meaning in their work lives.
In today's episode, we chat with Scarlett Lewis, who started the Jessie Lewis Choose Love movement. Scarlett's 6-year-old son was murdered at Sandy Hook Elementary School. Not gonna lie, it was especially hard for us to keep it together during this recording.
At certain points, I realized I just wasn't breathing. And I think we both let out a massive exhale after the recording was over.
As you all know, we typically try to keep our podcast episodes short and sweet, around 20 minutes. But for this special episode, we're sharing a longer recording with you today because Scarlett's call for radical love and compassion is just unbelievably powerful and beautiful.
So join us as we talk with Scarlett Lewis.
So 12 years ago, December 14th, 2012, my 6-year-old son, alongside 19 of his first grade classmates and 6 educators, were murdered in 2 classrooms at Sandy Hook Elementary School. And, you know, I am a mom that lives in this little New England town, thinking, you know, seeing those people on the cover of People magazine and hearing about other school shootings and violence in our communities, but knowing in my heart that that would never happen to my family. It wasn't even a concern until it happened.
Scarlett was a single mother and found herself waiting at the firehouse on that fateful day. Her 12-year-old son, JT, was in lockdown in a nearby middle school. But she remembers vividly how she was still thinking and assuming that everything was okay, that Jessie was okay.
I had this moment that, you know, we were waiting at the firehouse. It was that day. And all the other parents had been reunited with their kids. And so there was a lot of parents that were there kind of waiting for answers. And my son, JT, was in lockdown in Spanish class in middle school, maybe a mile away from the elementary school. And we were at the fire department. And he texted me and said, "Mom, can I come wait with you?" And I thought at that point, and I'm waiting, and there's, you know, military helicopters flying overhead. There's, you know, just complete chaos. And I'm still thinking, yeah, you know, let Nana and Papa come and pick you up. They're getting Dunkin' Donuts coffee because we're waiting here. And once they find Jesse, because I had pictured him leading a small contingent of kids out into the woods, he's going to want his big brother. You know, we'll probably go out to dinner tonight. It was just, it sounds maybe crazy, but that's the extent to which you think this will never happen to you. Mm-hmm. And so JT came, and, you know, during those hours that we were waiting, now I know they were identifying bodies, but before they said they were searching for them. Mm-hmm. And so, but I would have first responders come and asking me really tough questions like, did Jesse, you know, trying to be nonchalant, did Jesse have any identifying marks on his body? And, you know, me looking over at JT and me responding, because he is right on me. He is watching. He's not just listening, he's watching, you know, my every response and reaction. And I have to be mindful of myself and how I do that. And I'm thinking, how I respond now is teaching him how to respond to all difficulty in the future. Mm-hmm. And so I really tried to be the best version of myself with the skills and tools I had at the time, which weren't that many, by the way. And so, you know, I kind of made my decision right then. I am all that JT has, and he's going to be relying on me. So what is this journey going to look like?
Just a few days later, Scarlett found a message that Jesse had scrawled in his 6-year-old handwriting on the chalkboard in the kitchen.
Yeah, so I initially thought I would never be able to go home because I raised my 2 boys in a little farmhouse by ourselves as a single parent. And, you know, I was just picturing going back in there and seeing the remnants of Jesse and his little boots by the door and toothbrush by the sink and PJs by the bed. And I thought, I'm never going to be able to go there. But it came down to basically, and maybe some of the parents listening will understand if you're single, who is going to pick out his clothes for the casket. And I know that's horrible to even think about. And it's not something we should ever have to think about, but I wanted to be the one to do that. And that's really what inspired me to make the trip home. And it was on my way out the door, and I have this spray painted chalkboard on the side of one of my kitchen cabinets that we barely used. Mm-hmm. And I found a note that Jesse had written, and it was his height, phonetically spelled because he was in 1st grade and just learning to write. But it was very clear that it said nurturing, healing, love. Mm-hmm. And by that time, I had seen a lot of reactions from a lot of people. There was a lot of understandably angry and blaming reactions. And I saw that and I thought, that's the solution. Mm. Nurturing, healing, love. People that can give and receive nurturing, healing love feel good about themselves. And people that feel good about themselves do not want to cause harm. And it just struck me that the solution was so simple to what's going on in our society. But what I've learned is that, of course, simple isn't always easy.
Mm. Yeah. Because I think for most of us, when we think about Sandy Hook and other tragedies, we, if we had to imagine ourselves in those situations, it's very easy for me as an example to think about just curling up into a ball and not wanting to engage with the world at all, or becoming hateful and vengeful and angry. And you chose just a very different route. Can you kind of tell us that journey? And I imagine this was kind of a lengthy process. How long did it take you to shift into this mode of choosing love over hate?
There were a few things that happened. One was a woman came by my mom's house where I was staying, and she had lost a son to violence 20 years prior. Mm. And during those first few days, I was in such shock and pain that I was surprised I was still alive. It was a weird kind of sensation, but I remember looking at my hand and kind of looking at the blood flowing through the veins and saying, thinking to myself, my blood is still pumping through my veins, but I don't feel like I'm alive. I feel like I'm dead. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know what the future would look like. I have a tremendous faith. And I was thinking about the perpetrator, and his name is Adam Lanza. He was a former student of Sandy Hook Elementary School. I was thinking about how someone could do something so heinous and what must have happened to him to drive him to do that. And then this mom came to visit me, and I was so grateful because my first thought at seeing her in front of me was, I'm going to live. Mm. She's 20 years out, so I'm going to live. And then she started telling me her story and what her life was like. And about 10 minutes into her story, I kind of did this. Thank you so much Thank you for coming in. Thank you for having the courage to share your story. You've been so helpful. And she was. But at the same time, I was thinking in my mind, I don't want that. I don't want anger and resentment and thoughts of revenge 20 years out. I realize now nobody's going to tell me exactly what I need to do to get to the future that I want. Everybody has their own stories. Everybody makes their own choices, but I can get back to joy, which is what I wanted to do. Because we had such a good time, the boys and I. And I didn't want this to define my life or JT's life. And so I thought my future is going to be what my choices are right now. And so I better start making them. And I will say that forgiveness was one of the best choices that I ever made. And really, I was watching the reactions from the other members of the community, and understandably, there was so much anger and rage. And I was watching that being played out in reactionary responses. At one point, there was a movement and trend for the moms to change their thumbnails on Facebook to, the circle with a red circle with the line through it. And they were giving the middle finger to guns. And to me, I was thinking, is that becoming the energy that actually was responsible for murdering Jesse? Like, how do you thoughtfully respond to a tragedy like this? Is it with anger and revenge and just this F you attitude? Or is it by thoughtfully responding with Jesse's message? And how I understand the fear-based, anger-based response and reaction, but I didn't want to have that. And I didn't want to live my life that way. And, thinking about Adam Lanza and what he went through got me started thinking about forgiveness. And from the very beginning, I was saying there were 28 deaths. There were 28 victims. That was not popular because there were 26, and you saw 26 everywhere. But when I was giving my interviews, I was saying 28 because I was including Adam's mom, whom he murdered on his way out the door that morning to Sandy Hook, as well as Adam, because that there's a story behind that. And, I didn't get clear on what that story was until the investigation was over, but I knew, I assumed that it had something to do with bullying and with neglect and with not getting his needs met. And that's exactly what it was. And, I thought about Nancy Lanza, his mom, who gave him access to guns. And I thought, she made a mistake. And she paid for that mistake. He shot her 4 times in the face on the way out that morning. I'm sorry to be so blunt. This is the reality of it.
What's obvious from these stories is Scarlett's compassion for even the killer of all these people. When Sandy Hook happened, she immediately thought of Adam Lanza and the kind of pain and suffering he must have been going through to have such a hateful thought. She sees the origin story of this tragedy from the inception of that angry thought. And then in the fullness of her grief and mourning, she began a movement starting on the day of Jesse's funeral.
I always say that the movement started at Jesse's funeral when I got up to speak, and I said, this whole tragedy started with an angry thought in Adam Lanza's head. Wow. And an angry thought can be changed. And I asked everybody to start thinking about what they think about and to change one angry thought a day into a loving thought.
Wow.
And I said that will make you feel better, and that will positively impact the world through the ripple effect. So everybody goes out to the 4 corners of the US and they start calling me, emailing me, and texting me a week later saying that one simple act had completely changed their life.
Wow.
And I knew that I was onto something. And that's one of the other foundational aspects of Choose Love. It's a lot about our thoughts.
Scarlett took Jesse's message of nurturing, healing, love, and urged everyone at the funeral to take one hateful or angry thought and turn it into a loving thought.
The spiritual writer Parker Palmer believes there are at least two ways for the heart to break. He writes that the pieces of a broken heart, those sharp-edged fragments, can become shrapnel we use to inflict others with pain, to seek revenge, to try to resolve our suffering by hurting another. Or, in contrast, our heart can be broken open into the largeness of life, into a greater capacity to hold one's own and the world's pain. A heart that is broken open is willing to serve and give without condition.
This is exactly the choice Scarlett faced after losing Jesse. She could have used her broken heart as shrapnel, letting anger and bitterness become her response to unimaginable loss. Many would understand that reaction. Instead, she allowed her heart to break open into that nurturing, healing love.
Scarlett, you are so inspiring. It's incredibly powerful to hear how you've taken such tragedy and loss and transformed it in a way that's served others. And I'm also just so inspired by this idea of what are we led by, love or fear? And I'm curious about if you would talk a little bit more specifically about this foundation, this movement that you've created and what that's looked like for you and what you've been able to do through it.
So I took that message of nurturing, healing, love, and I brought it to a doctoral professor at Western Connecticut State University. He had started the Compassion, Creativity, and Innovation Center with seed money from the Dalai Lama. Mm-hmm. And he wrote a book called The Compassionate Achiever. His name is Dr. Chris Cook. And I said, here's this message that my son left me, nurturing, healing, love. I know that I am supposed to get this message into school. I'm supposed to amplify this message in schools. What does that look like? And he said, it's called social emotional learning. Mm-hmm. So go and do some research. And I'd never heard of that before. So I did my research, and while looking up what that was, realized I don't have these skills and tools, almost any of them. I didn't learn them from my parents. I didn't learn them in school. I didn't learn them in a lifetime of working. And so now here I am, a mother of two boys. I can't give what I don't have. I love them, but I can't give them these essential life skills. So I started talking with teachers all across the country and asking them about this program. And come to find out at that time, less than 10% of schools had a social emotional learning program that they really embraced. And so I started asking, why not? This is so important. This looks like it's the most important thing. And then if you look at the research behind it, kids get better grades and test scores, higher attendance, higher graduation rates, less stress and anxiety. It's a statistically effective way to reduce and prevent bullying. And then these last throughout life, and there's skills and tools that we need for the rest of our lives to do to be the best version of ourselves for our families and at work. And so I started getting the reasons, but mostly I thought it's because maybe even educators don't understand how important this is and how they would benefit. And so I went to the program director at Sandy Hook Elementary School, and I asked her if she'd ever heard of social emotional learning. And she said, of course. And I said, what happened? And she said, well, we purchased this program and it was so expensive that we couldn't afford to train our teachers. So we sent a small contingent out to get trained. They were supposed to come back and train the trainer. That never happened. So I thought to myself, okay, then I know what needs to be done. I need to create a program. I need to synthesize the best of the best with what is out there, because what I was being told is that, if you have SEL, you need mindfulness, and then there's resilience training, and then there's positive psychology and all of these different things. I thought, I'm going to put it into one program and I'm going to make it free because every child deserves access to this. I thought about my own life and what my life would have looked like if I had social emotional competence, which I didn't. Mm. And so began working with experts to create this program that's now been out in the field for 8 years. And I just realized maybe 2 years ago that this program is really kind of my roadmap to healing as well. Mm. It's a universal language. It's as much for the educators as it is for the kids, because everything that you're learning is something that even if you are, an expert, consider yourself an expert in it, you have to reinforce within yourself. You have to practice within yourself. You have to be cognizant of the fact that you have a choice every day. We have to be reminded of these things. I've lived and breathed this for 12 years, and I have to be reminded that I have a choice when conflict arises.
The mission of the Jessie Lewis Choose Love movement is to make sure that everyone has access to the essential life skills needed for human flourishing. This movement has caught fire without any marketing and by word of mouth and referral only. Choose Love has spread to 16,500 schools in every state in America and 135 countries. The program has a specific formula that kids go through.
So it starts with courage, because courage is the most important character value, and it's the one that underlies all the rest. And we use age appropriately, of course, Jessie's example of courage, because that's the same capacity for courage that we all have. Mm. He was a 6-year-old little boy. And when I say capacity, I mean that what research says is that courage is like a muscle. We can practice it and strengthen it. So we do brave breaths, brave poses, and we have all these different ways in our program to help strengthen courage. And then we go into gratitude. And we know that gratitude does fortify us from the inside out to better handle difficulty with more strength and grace. Gratitude also shifts our lens, the focus of our lens, from negative to positive, where we have more opportunities, where we are better able to find solutions. And then we have forgiveness. So it's courage plus gratitude plus forgiveness. Forgiveness is so important. It is sometimes the only way that you can let go of anger and hatred and resentment. And it's a way that helps you find meaning in your suffering, but let go of the pain. Mm. And actually, when I talk about suffering, I understand now what the Dalai Lama said, or whoever said this statement. Pain is inevitable in life, but suffering is optional.
Yes.
Pain is inevitable and it's short lasting, but suffering comes from our thoughts. And then we go from forgiveness into compassion in action, which is, identifying a need within yourself or someone else and then acting upon that. That's why we have compassion in action, because all of the nurturing, healing love that you give out, you get back. And there's so much great, as you all know, research behind this and neuroscience, and all of that is choosing love. And I truly believe that every day, our biggest choice when we wake up until we go to bed is choosing love over fear, because that impacts every decision that we make.
Scarlett's story speaks directly to how we understand impact in our professional lives. In an age of global challenges and overwhelming complexity, it's easy to feel like our individual actions don't matter. But Scarlett demonstrates something profound, that the most transformative work often begins with the smallest, most personal choices.
Absolutely. Scarlett shows how our individual choices can create ripple effects far beyond what we can immediately see. Choosing love over fear isn't just a personal philosophy. It's a method of creating systemic change, one interaction at a time.
It's about understanding that our workplace isn't separate from our humanity. Every conflict, every challenge is an opportunity to practice courage, gratitude, and compassion. Scarlett's work with the Choose Love movement isn't just about emotional skills. It's about reimagining how we show up in the world, whether that's in a classroom, a boardroom, or our most personal relationships.
Scarlett, your work through the Jessie Lewis Choose Love movement has transformed such a personal tragedy into a mission that's now reached millions of children across the world. Could you share about how building this movement has changed your relationship with purpose?
Absolutely. That's a loaded question. It's a really good one. I think that I thought that my purpose before the tragedy was being a mom, being a good citizen. I didn't think too much about my purpose, by the way. So I'm kind of going back and trying to think of what I must have been thinking subconsciously, but mostly focused on my family and raising two boys to be good citizens themselves and trying to model that for them as well. But I really didn't have too much of an outward focus. And when Jesse died, and he was actually murdered, a few things came to light. First was the fact that he sacrificed his life to save 9 of his classmates. And that got me thinking about how I live my life. And I started looking back at all the decisions that I'd made in my life, like relationships, like job decisions and what I did. And I realized that they were all made in fear. So taking jobs, not because I wanted the job or it fed my soul or because that's where my gifts and talents lied, but because it had benefits and the commute was tolerable. All of these things that I realize now I didn't have to lower my standards for. And I realized that moving through my own pain and literally trying to model for my older son, who was 12 years old at the time, what living in love, choosing love over fear, living without fear looked like, so that the tragedy didn't define both of our lives.
Yeah.
Realizing that really our purpose is here to take what we've learned from our own experiences, both good and bad, and using those lessons to help other people, that is truly what we're here for. And then starting the Choose Love movement and being able to live that has been incredible. And then, learning about the healing benefits of living with an outwardly focused life, living to serve, living to give, and what that means. I've truly, truly experienced all of that. And I'm so grateful. And I can say I don't think I would have gotten there without having what I call the rug of life pulled out from underneath me.
100%. It's so powerful. Scarlett, I wanted to ask you a question about your sense of calling, your sense of vocation. Many people see calling as something that's discovered or something that kind of comes predetermined in our lives. But your journey suggests that purpose or calling can actually come through the choices we make and how we engage with the challenges that are presented to us. I'm curious about how you understand that role of calling in your life.
That's a great question. I've had kids ask me, Miss Lewis, would you be choosing love and doing this organization if your son hadn't died? And I say, absolutely not. No, I had to get out of my comfort zone into my growth zone. And I had to be drop kicked out of it, by the way.
Yeah.
In order to find my purpose and my calling. I came upon the science behind post-traumatic growth. And it fascinated me because I had never heard of that before. I had always heard of PTSD. And so, when the tragedy happened, even at the firehouse that I was talking about before, what were my thoughts? My thoughts were, oh my goodness, if things don't work out here, I'm definitely going to have PTSD. What is that? How's that going to manifest in me? I'm probably going to be institutionalized. This is, fear. Who's going to take care of my 12-year-old son? Those were the thoughts that were going through my mind as I was trying to be the best version of myself, by the way, for my 12-year-old son who was there. And then as I was doing my research, I found that actually, in reality, far fewer of us suffer from PTSD than actually experience post-traumatic growth. Most of us grow through difficulty, and that's how we're designed. So in the Choose Love movement, we talk a lot about post-traumatic growth, and we talk a lot about pain because pain has a purpose. It's there to help us grow. And when you understand that, it takes away some of the fear in the event. And fear is what exacerbates pain and inhibits healing.
Yeah.
So you've got kids now that understand I am going to have pain in life, physical, mental, and emotional. And by the way, whoever says that, right? Nobody ever told me that. And nobody wants to be in pain.
Mm-hmm.
And we do resist and avoid it or maybe numb ourselves if we don't have the awareness and some skills and tools and the courage to face it, to pause, to get curious, to ask ourselves, what are the lessons in here for me? How is this going to help me learn and grow and be strengthened? Because it does. And it's not so much about what happens to you in life. It's about how you thoughtfully respond. You know, and I know that personally because I have now people sharing their stories with me. And they'll start, interestingly enough, by saying, you know, this is nothing like what happened to you, but I'd like to share my story with you. And then they start on a story that I believe is far worse. I know you're not supposed to comparison grief, but, you know, the truth of the matter is those painful things can and will happen. And we have to fortify our kids with the skills and tools and awarenesses they need to be able to face it and ask those questions about growth and not be taken down by them and then possibly take down other people as well.
Yeah. It's so interesting, Scarlett, because you have from the very beginning been thinking about like, how do I model this for my son who is watching my every move? And I'm curious how he has weathered this challenge and whether you've kind of had to use him as a guinea pig for a lot of your learnings around social emotional learning and this kind of post-traumatic growth. Like, does he sort of think about these things in the same way that you do?
That's a good question. I know that I've modeled this for him and not perfectly at all. He would be the first one to tell you that. So I would go ahead and admit it. But I know that he knows that I try to be consistent and he knows that I try my best. And he has learned from that. I know. He was more angry in the beginning than I was. I was more thinking about and more trying to understand what Adam Lanza was feeling. And he was very angry at having his brother taken and the disruption in his life and all the things that happened then. But he moved through that anger. And I think he really saw that forgiveness helps release the anger and pain. And it's really kind of probably the most powerful thing that we did. And he now works for Choose Love, by the way. He does our social media and filming, and he is just one of the most beautiful people that I know. And I've come to realize that people that have gone through real difficulty and have chosen love as a thoughtful response, those are very special people. They have incredible stories. There's a reason behind what they do. It's firmly grounded in love. And, you know, I think that we overlook a lot of times that pain is a very powerful connector.
Yeah.
JT and I have definitely seen this and experienced the benefits actually. I mean, we were in a very high profile tragedy. I mean, I say benefits, but we also had the love of the world coming into us.
Mm.
And we were very aware of that. And not everyone was. But we went to visit this 10,000 square foot warehouse together, and all the bins with all the teddy bears and the handmade Afghans and the mostly stuff from kids, by the way, because kids want to reach out and they know that when they do that, it helps and heals themselves. But they know that, just from being closer, I think, to purity and perfection. And we would stand there and I would say, this is the love that's being sent to us. How blessed are we, really? This is amazing. And we'd take the cards and we'd read them together. Little kids saying, I'm sorry for your lost. It was a huge tragedy, monumental, but there was also so much, equal amount of love being given to us. And I just wanted us to soak it up. And it was really healing for us.
Michelle, as we sit here with Scarlett's story, I'm struck by something profound. We often talk about the soul of work as if it's something separate from our personal lives. But Scarlett reveals something much deeper. Her journey shows us that our most meaningful work emerges not from our carefully constructed career plans, but from how we choose to respond to life's most devastating moments. We're both moms, and it's easy to imagine that after losing a child, we could easily just withdraw from life and become consumed by grief or anger. But Scarlett did something revolutionary. She transformed her deepest pain into a global movement of compassion.
This isn't just a personal story. It's a masterclass in how purpose can emerge from the most unexpected places. Her greatest purpose emerged from her greatest loss. She would give anything to have Jesse back, but she recognizes that the work she does now wouldn't exist without the tragedy that preceded it. This isn't about suggesting that tragedy is worth it, but about acknowledging the remarkable human capacity to create meaning, even in our darkest moments.
And what's remarkable is how this isn't about minimizing pain or finding some trite silver lining. It's about understanding that our greatest professional purposes often arise from our most challenging experiences. Scarlett shows us that the soul of work isn't about avoiding difficulty, but about how we metabolize our experiences, how we turn our deepest wounds into our most powerful mission. At the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia, there's a heart big enough to play in. The exhibit of the giant heart is 2 stories tall, and as you walk through, you can pretend you're a blood cell navigating the clear and clogged arteries. You could dance your way from ventricle to atrium. You could skip through valves and hang out in one of the 4 chambers of the heart. I brought my kids there before the pandemic, and what struck me most were the valves, opening and closing. The heart knows exactly when to hold on and when to let go.
It's so incredibly beautiful. Scarlett's own broken heart demonstrates that same rhythm of receiving and releasing that is essential for life and healing in a broken world. She's living a life fortified by pain and enabling hundreds of thousands of children to feel a sense of belonging and to choose love over fear.
She's Michelle Weiss.
And she's Dana Allen Walsh.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of A Life Worth Working. If you did, please leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to podcasts.
And don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends and loved ones who may also be searching for purpose and meaning in their work lives, or what we call the soul of work.